Right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this uh, very put together stream tonight of a resurrected show that well, I did probably over 8 months ago now. Was the last episode, which was the Scourge of the Shires, or Shire Scourge, as I've called it. And tonight we are joined by three guests who I've know Mitch and Hitman, of course. John is new to this channel, though he comes very highly recommended, and we're going to have a great discussion uh, about the Putin interview and also the modern modern storytelling and why writers are unable to tell any good stories that um, resonate with people. Um, and to start off with, John, how are you, sir?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me.
And just tell me a bit about yourself. How sort of how did you get into this space? I guess into this
Well,
space.
I that's a long story, and I want to be brief, so I'll just say that I would like to make some films, and in the meantime, I'm writing fiction and working with some of our guys as a story editor.
Oh, good. So you're into fiction as a fiction writing, um, and what's sort of your genre? Are you do you have like a particular genre that you stick to?
I love science fiction and fantasy.
Oh, nice. That's really good. And there's a lot of good, I guess, dissident writers and storytellers out there. And I think Morgoth had an interview with one recently. It was by a publishing house called House of Horrors, and quite interesting. Very sort of people that you don't see. We'll go into our second discussion here, most definitely, John, and you'll be definitely key to that. Mitch, how are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. I mean, usually I'd say same old, but I don't know if I should continue that tradition here.
Yeah, yeah, probably not the tradition. So, some of you of this channel may know Mitch from Iron Duke's channel. We appear alongside Iron Duke quite often every other weekend. Um, and so, I mean, Mitch, you're on tonight. Just for those who may not know, just tell us a bit about yourself, your sort of your I guess sort of your because I brought you on as basically our Russian expert in this, and you speak a bit of Russian, you know a great deal of Russian history. Um, just sort of tell us about how you got into, I guess, how you became interested in sort of uh, Russian civilization.
Um, that could be a long. I'd condense it down to I just see like England and Russia are in a way kind of kindred in some ways uh in that while we're a maritime power, we still have that great empire, and we had a great sense of civilization. We converted to Christianity, all manner of different powers that Russia has, whereas Russia, while they're not maritime, are more Eurasian, land based. Um, they have a lot more traumatic history than us, and also growing up. Many. I mean, I be a bit of a consumer by some but games like Call of Duty, World of War. You've got overall Russian history, where that quite interesting. I mean, I don't know where I'm going with this, but yeah, I've always just
Yeah.
felt being drawn to Russia in a way that it's like similar to my interest in Germany. It's like very interesting history. Americans would say the same of Britain. So
Yeah.
I'm quite Russophilic as far as things go.
I do think that there is something to the sort of kindred mind of the English or the British and the Russian. I mean, we have, for us, our expanse, our destiny is that of the open seas, and for the Russian it is the steppes, the endless flat steppes. um and so I do think there is something to that we sort of share that same outlook, that same trait and outlook on life than probably other European groups don't necessarily have. Most definitely. Hitman. So Hitman. I was on. Hitman, how are you, sir?
I'm very well, thank you, and I'm glad to be here. I am great to be on your channel for the first time.
Yes, and of course, people might remember I was on Hitman's channel back in, I think it was January in the new year, and we talked about uh, early Christianity in Britain, in Roman Britain, and sort of post-Roman and Anglo-Saxon Britain, and I guess sort of Hitman. What's for you, as we carry on with the theme of introduction, what's your sort of background to our spaces here?
Well, I've watched people like the Academic Agent and others for several years, and how I actually got involved in all of this was actually uh, about 18 months ago, because Absolute Majesty had a Discord because I watched him as well, and one day he was just like, if anybody who's watching wants to come on and challenge some of my points, you're very much welcome to. And I messaged him and said, well, I'd be interested, though not to challenge, but rather to perhaps buttress or discuss some ideas. And yeah, he had me on, and that was a stream on the Greek War of Independence, as part of his series on orthodoxy, autocracy, and nationality, or the series on the history of the Orthodox Commonwealth. So as you can imagine, that heavily involved in Russia. And then I was invited back. We did a stream on the Crimean War, and then we did one on the sick man of Europe, the sort of decline of the Ottoman Empire and the Russo-Turkish War. So as you can see, I obviously have an interest in Russian culture and civilization. And then further on from there, last year on my channel, I actually had AM on to discuss the concept of, is Russia having these two faces? It's got a Western face and its own sort of Eastern native face, and how true that was. And that was a very interesting conversation.
No, definitely, and of course, Absolute Majesty is a friend of the channel, and he's done a great series that you can watch. Apart from Vladimir Putin and his epic historiography of the Russian-speaking people, you can also check out Absolute Majesty's version on the origins of the Kievan Rus and vice versa. So I think that's everything. Thank you, everyone in chat. Nord Hugo, who has sort of helped me sort of put things together here, also in chat. Thank you. And I believe he's at a wedding. I hope it's not his own wedding, that he's sort of sneaking out, missing the dance or anything like that to watch this. So, but thank you for appearing in chat. And we got Cinder Mountain Studio. Is that affiliated to you, John? Is that your YouTube?
Yeah, that's my thing.
That's your thing, okay. And then Lukey World and everyone on Twitter as well. Thanks for watching and streaming both to YouTube and Twitter. So this should be a good show. So make a start here. So it was announced this week that Tucker Carlson would travel over to was in Moscow, and the rumor mill was spinning that there would be an interview with Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, and it happened. And because Tucker Carlson has these sort of Twitter formatted interviews with high profile people. I think he's had Trump, he's had Kanye, he's had all these sorts of figures, and Candace Owens and people like that. But this one was quite a significant one, obviously, with Vladimir Putin. And there were many people who were raging about it, calling him out. The pundits have, I think, as Atman just said in chat there, the even had Hillary Clinton, sort of coming out, and even before the interview was aired, and saying, trying to remind people that that Tucker is a liar and a con man and all the usual stuff. But when it was released, I watched the interview like many others, I think it's got over 150 million views combined with YouTube and Twitter. And the first question that Tucker asked was, why did you invade Ukraine? And there have been many memes about this because it was the answer that Putin gave. He started with Russian history at its on its foundational level with the Rurik dynasty. So what do we think, guys, of the because I actually thought it many people viewed it as a I saw many people saying that it was incoherent, it had bare no relevance, but in many ways it does actually get at the heart of the issue, that the the Russian people does in fact stretch of what we would call traditional Russian lands from, and that Kiev was fundamentally a Russian city, that Belarus today is that of made up of Russians, and of course Russia today, and that the idea that some boundaries drawn up by the Soviet Union in the latter half of the 20th century it viewed by many as some sort of unchangeable line on the map. So just sort of start. What do you guys think of the of the response by Putin to talking about old Russia, the history of the Russian people?
Well, I think it's fascinating, and we mentioned apostolic majesty, but a phrase AM has liked to use in the past is that history is a process of becoming, and that is what Putin's view of Russia is. Russia, as it currently exists, is an extension of this long durée of history, of characters, people, events, and this culture and civilization, and he wants it to carry on in this process of becoming, and he does not want it to be torn asunder and ruined, in his view. And this is why he felt he had the need to give all this context and extrapolation.
Yeah, this definitely is his Silmarillion to the Russian Lord of the Rings, of giving us an understanding of just what everyone is up against. And people often talk about how Putin wanted to reunite the Soviet Union, but apparently it's much bigger than that. It's the whole of historical Russia.
No, definitely. And I mean, I've had interactions today with those who were taking the line, oh well, he's taking it from the position of the Muscovite Russians, that the Kievan Rus is a whole separate thing, and I've taken great offence to that sort of line of questioning, because all you're arguing is some silly semantics game of where the capital of the kingdom is. Okay, so what if it's in Novgorod? So what if it's in Kiev? So what if it's in Moscow? It's all part of the same people. It's the same people. It's like arguing that I use the example. It's like arguing that Anglo-Saxon England isn't true. It has no connection to modern England because the capital was in Winchester, or something daft like that.
Or it's like arguing, for example, what was the capital of Rome? Was it Rome or Constantinople, or Ravenna or Milan? It's like they're all part of the same civilization ultimately.
I know, so it's a ridiculous statement. I mean, to give more. When the Channel Islands were invaded by Germany, I mean, does that make them not British anymore? There's or something like that one. Anyway, Mitch, what did you make of this interview? The talking about the foundational story of the Russian people by Putin.
Yeah, I thought it was. I mean, many people have commented, "Oh, it's impressive how articulate Putin could be in respect of half an hour." I mean, that's like, I don't know, the standard like sort of midwit response, but then it's also my main critique of it was he spent too long talking about the roots of Russia in a sense. I mean, he could just condense it into like 5 or 10 minutes of just saying, "Oh well, look, from like the 9th century up until the 1990s, Russia and Ukraine were basically brothers, interconnected, practically as blood brothers. It was only in the past 30 years that the Ukrainians have been perverted from that sense of brotherhood and whatnot. But then he could have just spent the real effort just talking, about Victoria Nuland and the likes of her practically subverting Ukraine to be used as a weapon against Russia today. I think that's my main critique. But I did on one hand, I was thinking, I already know all this, but then again, it's also, well, how many people out there are probably just thinking, they're actually, because Putin's not exactly an ideologue. He's not a guy who's animated by radical belief in changing the world. He's just a guy who likes to keep the ship steady, and he's kind of, I don't know if you describe him as a sort of Russian Cincinnatus, but certainly a guy who he doesn't want to change. He doesn't want to rock the ship too much. He just wants to keep the Russian ship steady, and he's not particularly prosecuting this war ever since or bloodlust. It's more he's just seen it as correcting something that's gone wrong in Russian history, because at the end of the day, the Russians, I think Slavs in general are like this, by the way, where they see themselves as a part of history and they must carry on their history. They're very proud of their cultures, even to a point where they'll genocide each other whenever, in terms of all the internet memes you'll find about Serb Slavs and Yugoslavia, for example. But yeah, that's one thing about how Putin views himself and his homeland in a way that it doesn't translate well to the Western audience of today, who are more deracinated, who are a lot more decoupled from their folklore, from their histories and mythologies, everything that characterized us as what we were.
Yeah, I mean, in the Russian mind, history is, as a Hitman would say now, I am afraid it is as a process, it's ancient. And, I think one of the problems in the West now is most people, number one, don't think of history. They don't think of their people as a group, because number one, it's been codified in law that in the UK, for example, that we don't exist as a racial group anyway since 2008. But also, history itself, I mean, I think in most people's minds, history sort of began in 1945, at the end of 1945. And you definitely, I remember with the reaction to the military operation of 2022, where you actually saw I guess, sort of everyone getting on the bandwagon at the time. And I think, Mitch, when we were sort of on our Duke's channel, I remember, I think we sort of covered, we talked about this, how it was, in many ways, this was it was quite clear that there was in the West, that there was a deliberate attempt to take Ukraine into a Western sphere of influence by redefining its culture and its history. And I think that in itself has really sort of culminated in this, because it's and what I was quite interested with was how Putin did criticize Lenin, because a great deal of issues that faced Ukraine and Russia was the formation of the Ukraine SSR and the Russian SSR, and the actual boundaries that were drawn up for the Soviet republics. I don't know if anyone wants to expand on that at all.
Sorry, yes, because I'm going to sorry to bring up AM again, but this reminds me of a stream he did with Semyagog last year, because Semyagog had a series of streams called Promethean Strategies, where he was looking at the ideas of Polish General Józef Pilsudski, who wanted to peel away nations like Ukraine and Belarus off of Russia in order to weaken it. And AM was on one of the streams, and he talked about this concept which Putin actually brought up in the interview, called Korenizatsiya, or indigenization, which is this idea that the Soviets were going to sort of bring up and develop these sort of infant sort of nationalities within the USSR, so Ukrainian, Belarusian, etc., etc. So it's almost like this idea that we're going to sort of equalize all these minorities and other groups within the Russian Empire, unlike before where the Russians were clearly dominant.
No, definitely. And I mean, Putin also mentioned the how in, like, especially in Western Ukraine, you had with the Polish Lithuanian Commonwealth, you had the or actually this was a bit before that, the how you had Orthodox the Orthodox churches who sort of re-entered with Rome, fell back into fold with Rome, and how that changed that dynamic in many ways. And I mean, you still have you still, as we talked about, in the far reaches of western parts of Ukraine, though greatly changed since over the centuries. But you do have the, I guess you could say, the more sort of hardcore Ukrainian nationalist element definitely lies in that western side of Ukraine than anywhere else in the country. And let's just get on to the sort of foundation here, because one of the strong foundation myths is the foundation of the Rurik dynasty by Rurik, and where you had the unification of all the Eastern Slavic tribes that would become the Russian people from the far north of the Novgorod region all the way down to Kiev and the sort of steppe region. And I mean, in very ways, as we referenced earlier, it is similar in sense to the unification of the Anglo-Saxon people into England. Do you think this was a good tactic by Putin to sort of invoke that legacy in that way?
Well, it depends on who he's talking to. I don't think. I mean, did you guys change your position based on all this background information?
Well, no, because a lot of what he was saying about Vladimir the Great and Václav the Wise, I guess things were already new. I sort of knew the foundational story and the conversion of the Kievan Rus in 988. So for me, it didn't really change. It just sort of the only thing that changed was I was sort of I wouldn't say surprised, but it just sort of reaffirmed that I guess he does know his own history in the sense, but he doesn't think it in a way of like a Western mind of just he thinks about it in civilizational terms. I know criticisms have been levied that is saying, well, he's a bit of like an ethno-nationalist. I don't think he is. I actually think I don't think he's that. I think he does think, though, Russia in a civilizational term. I don't think he thinks of it in Russian people sort of thing.
That's. Oh, sorry.
Okay. Yeah, the important point to bring up, AI, is that I don't know how much you know about the Russian political parties, but there's actually a party to the right of Putin in Russia, and it's quite amusingly called the Liberal Democratic Party of Russia. And their position is basically unadulterated Russian imperialism. Russia must reconquer the entire former Russian Empire, all of Central Asia, Belarus, Ukraine, all the Baltic, Finland. And so, obviously, when you look at Putin looks like a sane moderate compared to that. So,
well, yeah, I've heard some people describe him as basically being like being a lot more like a sort of social. Like, I mean, in another time, he'd be like a full-on social liberal type. He would just be one. He's just a very moderate. I mean, he was wanting Russia to join NATO in the early 2000s. He was a very pro-Western fella. All the people around him in those days were very liberal and whatnot. It was only like mid 2000s onward that he started pivoting more towards more conservative, nationalistic manner of ruling, because at that point he's just thinking, well, no matter how many overtures he makes to the West, they're always going to turn him down. But it's also so in the Russian constitution back in 2019, they did an amendment which pretty much says the Russians are a state building element of the country. So on one hand, you have all these like 20% ethnic group of the ethnic minorities like Yakuts, Buryats, Tatars, Chechens, you name it, who they're still seen as building blocks, but the Russians are the main state building element, and they're put on a pedestal. Not so much as like they get the state discriminating against all the minorities, but all the minorities just look up to the Russians in a sense, in that sense. So that's kind of where Putin's sense of nationalism comes from. Is Russia's got a cultural and civilizational legacy from the time of Rurik to this day, and it's a duty of not just the Russians but Yakuts, Buryats, Chechens, etc., to uphold it. Otherwise, they'll just fall into infighting, and nothing good will come of it if they
No,
were to turn their back on it.
no, and another thing that Putin raised as he went on was I guess, sort of a good motivating factor for Russian history and all its czars and himself is the shared religious, their shared orthodoxy with Ukraine, with in Russia, but also with the Serbs, the South Slavs, and the Romanians and the Balkans, even the Greeks, and that there is this shared sort of brotherhood aspect to it, and particularly with Ukraine, because of course Ukraine is majority Orthodox, though I mean effectively the true orthodoxy has been somewhat outlawed in Ukraine by the current regime. So the old rite that was practiced is banned because it goes back to Kiev and Rus days, days of Kiev and Rus. But so that's I think that is quite a strong motivator, especially in, and I think Cinder, you mentioned it about Donetsk, and because of course the real conflict was as a result of the Maidan coup in 2014, and where the government of Ukraine was overthrown by effectively the CIA in the West, and you saw a reaction from the Ukrainian provinces in the eastern Crimea, who I guess saw what was happening, which was a deliberate attempt to draw it into the arms of NATO in the West. And it was Donetsk and Luhansk provinces that declared as independent republics, and then the acquisition of Crimea by Russia, along with a referendum.
Yeah, I just want to point out that I had watched a bunch of those videos at the time, and they were quite graphic of just how many civilians, at least what appeared to be in those videos, losing their lives because of artillery shells. And I know there was some bombing, air bombing too. It's just odd that would happen, and we wouldn't hear about it until now in 2022. And Hunger in the chat mentioned what made Putin move on this issue now in 2022.
Yes. It's quite interesting because I know Tucker asked him that question several times, and he didn't really give a clear answer. I actually thought on that particular question he would retaliate. Well, I didn't act in 2022 because I acted in 2014 or something like that. I thought he might have given some sort of act, but I mean, his rationale for all of this, and this is something I have mixed. I mean, I've talked about this before on other channels, by the way. Hitman and John and Mitch will know that I assume some of you, I think you guys are you aware with the term boomer truth at all?
Yes, absolutely.
John, are you aware with it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So in the West, we have our own boomer truth about what happened during the Second World War, especially in Europe. And Russia has their own Boomer Truth as well. The Great Patriotic War against the evil Nazis, and it's very similar. It's very similar, though both have two different conclusions. But what's similar is that whatever the enemy of the day always is on par with mid-century German man. So whether that's Slobodan Milosevic or Saddam Hussein, or now Putin, or Putin using that term against the Ukrainian regime. And his justification in this interview was denazification of Ukraine, and that has been quite consistent answer of his whenever other when he announced the military operation back in 22 that this was an act of denazification, and that he said in the interview that he would tolerate a Ukraine separate of Russia, but he wouldn't tolerate a Nazi Ukraine. He then went on to discuss various, I guess, sort of Ukrainian German allies during the Second World War. Mitch, you'll probably sort of expand on that point. I was thinking, I forgot the chap's name now. I think there was two of them that were Ukrainian, Ukrainian collaborators or nationalists who worked with the Wehrmacht and the SS.
Yeah, it's like you had Stepan Bandera, whose name is practically mud outside of Western Ukraine. Like Poles, Russians, Jews all hate him because he did very despicable stuff. There's even a Polish film from like 2016, I believe it was. That very graphic film, which if you've got a strong stomach, I suppose you can watch it, but that's a very graphic detail it shows. I think the other guy is always Shukevich. Now, Stepan Bandera, I mean, because the OUN, as they were called, Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, they were, I mean, you had two wings. You had on one hand, one wing, I can't remember who commanded the Wing A, it's called, where they collaborated with the Germans and they wanted to see an independent Ukraine against the Soviets because they saw the Russians as like an oppressive invader and all the rest of it. But then on the other hand, you have the second wing under Stepan Bandera, who just thought everyone's an opponent. They just want to kill it. They just have this insane bloodlust where everyone who lives on Ukrainian land, in this case, Galicia and Volynia, in the west of Ukraine, must be purged of non-Ukrainians, whether it be Russians, Hungarians, Romanians, Poles, whomever. They get killed off. The Germans had a great distaste for this sort of thing. So on one hand, they collaborated with them, but there was some, mainly Stepan Bandera's lot, who was just seen as so vicious, so evil that they just put away Stepan Bandera in a camp. But the killings still happened because of Shukevich, who was second in command of that particular wing of OUN. And the thing about when Putin talks about Nazism, the thing about Nazism in the Russian mind is they think of the Great Patriotic War. They think about 28 million Russians or Soviet citizens killed off. They don't think about the Holocaust or anything like that, like we do in the West. It's more Nazism is synonymous with anti-Russian sentiment, and so when you see Putin going on about Nazism, I mean, on one hand, it's one of those things where you can think, well, how's it advantageous towards nationalism over here? But then it's also, it's a mistranslated nuance in hindsight because Nazism to a Russian's mind is anti-Russian. Anything that tries to wipe out the Russians. So they'll call Victoria Nuland a Nazi because she's got a bloodlust against Ukraine, against the Russians, because her ancestors were a certain minority group who weren't particularly too fond of the Tsar and the Russian people during the period of settlement and so on.
Yes. John, Hitman, do you have anything to sort of add on that?
This is all just the Eastern conception of bash the fash? And if so, Why aren't they getting more support?
If I could just sort of come in on that point, because
Yeah.
this idea of being, anti-Nazi or anti-fascist, a good point was actually raised by the because the Old Glory Club did actually do their Pony Express stream, and they discussed this interview, and the take that was put out there. I can't remember who said it, was basically this idea of that. Obviously, Tucker, most of his audience are people who used to watch Fox News, right? So they're probably like boomer Americans. And the take was essentially Putin was sort of leaning into this a bit during the interview because he's hoping that using the term anti-fascist or anti-Nazi might persuade some of these boomer Americans that he's not such a bad guy and that he's got good intentions.
Yeah, that was. I mean, there have been some takes on this particular whole interview that this was a ploy by the CIA to basically normalize relations with Russia again, to get them around the table, because the war in Ukraine is just it's untenable, and that there needs to be a peace settlement. So this was sort of there is that theory going around that this is basically just bringing Russia back in from the cold effectively, and arrange a sort of peace settlement. Though we'll see what happens. I mean, it is possible, I guess, in that regard. I mean, on the, it's quite funny because when I was younger, we used to do a lot of veterans events, and because we lived not too far from a base, which was like it was like a museum there, in Dorset, and there was they used to have every year the veterans, and it's all, you had like American veterans, British veterans from the war, and also German ones, and we had like, it was mainly like North African, but from Rommel's division and everything, but you also had veterans appearing from Eastern Europe as well. We had German veterans, a few of the Germans turning up. They were on the Eastern Front. And one thing that always resonated with me is that in their mind, I can't repeat the exact phraseology here because it's just, we're not allowed on. But basically, in their sort of conception of it, they were fighting blank Bolshevism. You probably get the idea of what the blank is, but in that they were defending Europe from such and such Bolshevism. And it and what's that's fascinating me with all of Putin's interview is, I actually thought he'd be a bit stronger defender of the Soviet Union, but in some ways he does. He is quite critical in this interview of the Soviet Union, particularly under Lenin. He doesn't really say, he doesn't really say much under Stalin, but he is quite critical of the Soviet Union and the way it sort of governed itself.
Yeah, to first one, sorry.
Yeah, a thought of mine is that I see him as fundamentally kind of applying a Hegelian dialectic to Russian history. The Russian Tsardom or Empire is the thesis. The Soviet Union was the antithesis. Modern Russia is a synthesis of the two, because there are some elements of the old Soviet like aesthetics, and he's obviously got the Moscow victory parade he's kept. You've also got like the Russian army still uses, I think, a modification of the old Soviet sort of command structure and and a lot of the actual symbols. And also the Russian national anthem is the old Soviet anthem brought in by Stalin, but just some slightly amended lyrics.
Yes. I think that's a pretty good assessment of that, because on the, when you actually look at the aesthetics of the Kremlin, of when he's making addresses, you have the Byzantine Russian eagle. It's very much harkens back to the Russian Empire, the Tsardom, and the history. And but one thing he did also referenced quite a bit was Alexander I'm going to sorry, I was trying to pronounce his name. Nevsky, the Prince of Novgorod, who, I mean, he was
Alexander Nevsky. Yeah.
Nevsky, yeah, who he was the one that it was on the Battle of Ice, who kicked out the Livonian branch of the Teutonic Knights from Novgorod, who were on crusade, and he again talking about a foundational figure of Russian history. I mean, he is probably closer to modern Russia than Rurik or Vladimir the Great was.
Especially
And
true. Yep. So another point is that Alexander Nevsky's son will also go on to be the first Prince of Moscow. So there's an important connection in that respect as well.
oh yeah, Daniel. That's right, Daniel. And also the sort of bigger implication is that this was he you know, the Teutonic Knights, even though it was made up of Bohemians and Silesians and and other Germans and Saxons, but in the sort of overarching mind, it was effectively it was a Germanic monastic order, military order, and so the myth of a Russian prince kicking out the invading Germans from Russian lands, threatening the orthodoxy, because of course this was the attempt was to bring Novgorod into the Catholic Church, the Latin Church, also plays a big part in especially since World War II. So the because I remember that the Stalin, during the invasion of Russia, of Operation Barbarossa, he allowed the reopening of churches, and the propaganda aspect harkened back to Prince Alexander and even Napoleon's invasion of Russia. I mean, he resurrected all these Russian heroes who were long under the Soviet system, were beforehand, which were oppressed and sort of removed, and it was sort of all brought back as the propaganda campaign.
And also regarding the Battle of the Ice, remember you had Sergei Eisenstein's film adaptation, Alexander Nevsky. And what was even more amusing with that was Stalin heavily promoted it when it was first released in the late 30s. And then around the time of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, he suppressed that film because he didn't want to annoy the Germans. And then when the war came, he promoted it again.
Yeah, yes. Sorry, John, do you have anything to add on that point?
Yeah, as I listen to you talk about it, it occurs to me that it's important for Putin to create a narrative and a history of Russia that is so weighty that it outweighs what Tucker Carlson's key audience is, which their conception of Russia is Lenin, Stalin, Khrushchev, and the Red Menace. So if you go back hundreds of years before that and decades after that to try and make a case that this is not the Russia you think you know, I guess it works. I don't know. I think people tuned in to Tucker for some sensationalist stuff, and then were immediately hit with the Abe Simpson onion on the belt background story with all sorts of context. That definitely, I get it a lot from older guys. That you got to know the context, you got to understand the nuance. And I think it was important, and I don't think it's going to take. I think people are still going to go for the sensationalist stuff because we need a bad guy, and nobody. No. The world's consensus is not decided on who the ultimate bad guy is outside of Putin right now.
No, and looking at it, it does seem to be, and I see this sort of daily now when you see interaction, especially with, and this won't be like an America bashing America or anything, but it does appear that you have the foundation myth of America is effectively what's codified in law. It's the Constitution, it's the Declaration of Independence, it's things which is codified in law. But for Russia and most of everywhere else, it's not a document. It isn't like some sort of legalistic document, it's actually codified in the race and the ethnicity of the people, and that's its history. And I think what you have is this, why there is, because Putin said that America is isolating itself. It isn't that we're being isolated, is they're isolating themselves further. And I think that is kind of a key point as a as a problem in our modern age, because that is not just America now. Of course, it's Europe. It's with the European Union. It's with Britain. Unfortunately, largely, it's the history of itself has been forgotten. It's all now codified in your Supreme Courts and all these various laws and sort of parliamentary sovereignty and all these other aspects which have been corrupted and abused. And I do think that there is, it's it reminds me, I think it was Pompey who was besieging somewhere in southern Italy, and you had like the people besieged were so the commander being besieged or something was waving some sort of legal document saying that he was promised protection and everything. And I think Pompey says something along the lines, and this is just me paraphrasing here, that why are you waving documents when I bring a sword, you know? And it does appear to me that there is this, there is going to come this point where there's just going to be that clash of reality where the new world consensus founded on codified law and legalism, it's just going to collapse under its own BS.
True, but I think where we're talking about Russia, I think to an extent Putin has also engaged in this level of legal BS too. You know, the whole fact he's not called it a war or an invasion, he's called it, the SMO, the special military operation.
No, that is also true. He does engage in legalism. I mean, I guess there's two that. I mean, I guess yeah, that is true. Unless you argue that he's just saying it just to, as a, as an excuse. But I mean, yes, even he engages in it. I mean, I think the only notable time I think where I can think of a good example where that didn't take place was the Suez Crisis, which I cover on my channel. I've been sort of covering the history of decline of the British Empire, and effectively Britain's action in there was old-fashioned gunboat diplomacy of just going in there and sinking ships and raiding the coastline. And I mean, in that scenario, America and the Soviet Union did sort of tag team against us. I mean, but also we did try and we tried to get Israel in on to fabricate a conflict as well. But I mean, that's an example where we didn't really use any sort of legalistic. We just did, and we just ignored any complaints in the UN. So until we were unable to, due to the run on the pound. But I mean, yeah, I would say that's a fair assessment, Hitman, that even Putin does that. And that goes back to the whole boom and truth stuff. I mean, the whole denazification stuff. I mean, we know deep down, he probably doesn't care all that much about the denazification stuff, because at the end of the day, I still don't believe that if he's successful in Ukraine, I don't believe that western half of Ukraine, where a great deal of Ukrainian nationalist sympathies lie, he would actually have any interest of having that, to be honest.
No, I don't think he wants that either, because it would just be a very expensive territory to administer and hold on to. It's far more practical to either take the eastern half of Ukraine and you have the Dnieper acting as a natural defense, or perhaps the Dnieper and the southern coast, so you can claim all of the former Novorossiya and cut Ukraine off from sea access.
Yeah, that's in my impression. That's I've always sort of believed that was his general view. And I do think he wants Kiev, though. I do think he wants that city. That's one thing that he would want. And I imagine whatever remains of Ukraine, the capital would be like Lviv or something. I don't know, Mitch. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's often, I mean, I can't remember the precise words, but I remember like Kiev was remarked upon as like being like a pearl of the Rus back in like Kiev and Rus days, and it has like a very important position in Russian history, especially with the Orthodox Church, because there's that Pechersk Lavra monastery that's just outside Kiev. That monastery's been around since before the second millennium. That's how old it is. It's well over 1,000 years old, and it's seen as a big part of Russian Orthodox heritage. Given as like it's the first monastery in the same way that Canterbury is very sacred to an English Christian because of course, the Kingdom of Kent converted to Christianity with King Ethelbert.
Yes.
So that's kind of like where the Russian connection to Kiev goes. And also, I mean, when you look at elections, I mean, even like 2010, you didn't really see massive Ukrainian nationalist sentiment around the area of Kiev. Or even like Chernigov had a lot of more pro-Russian sympathies. It was only really the west, like cities like Vinnytsia and Lvov, and all these really western cities where you had this more Ukrainian nationalist pro-Western attitude. The only outliers, of course, being areas like Hungarian Transcarpathia and Romanian Bukovina, as well as, of course, Odessa and the area around there, which were a lot more pro-Russian because the pro-Russian side promised more minority rights and generally respected languages. Generally didn't want to go so one-sided for the West and spurg about Ukrainian nationalism like Bandera would have done.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, Putin did also confirm that he had no discussions with Hungary, with the Hungarian Prime Minister about the Hungarians taking sort of the Hungarian-speaking part of Ukraine.
Viktor Orban.
Viktor Orban, that's right. There was a rumor like a year ago that there was that Viktor Orban and Putin were in discussions that he'd basically take the Carpathian Mountain region of the Hungarian-speaking region of Ukraine and everything, and of course that I was skeptical of that at the time because I mean, let's be honest, I think if Viktor Orban did that, the EU would they would send in the tanks into Hungary. I don't think that would have, or NATO would have sent the tanks into Hungary. I don't think that would have happened. But it does sort of think back to, and I think Putin did mention this, that everything's sort of indicating a return to the old pre-World War One borders of effectively the Habsburg Empire and the Russian Empire and everything. That because of course Ukraine is not just a combination of from Russia. It's a combination of the Polish Prussian kingdom and the Austro-Hungarian empire as well.
Yeah, it's worth noting that. Oh, sorry.
Oh no, you go on.
I was just say, in 1914, there was actually like a Galician Russophile movement that existed where, because there were quite a few Western Ukrainians who were still like Russophile, Orthodox, all the rest of it, but they all got killed off pretty much by Austro-Hungarians. So the only ones that were left were the more anti-Russian Ukrainian nationalist types who later morphed into the OUN with Stepan Bandera and Roman Shulkevich.
Yes. And to sort of go further into the conflict itself, so Putin revealed, and this was sort of this has been picked up by a few commentators, that there was attempts to come around tables for a sort of a settlement, but at the beginning of all this, but it was our former Prime Minister Boris Johnson who put a stop to that.
Yes, in his very shit Chichilian way, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I believe this was confirmed by I'm going to butcher the name because I think it's Georgian or something, or Armenian, whatever. But it's like David Alhamia or something like. He's a member of Zelensky's part, and he said, "Oh yeah, Boris actually told us to reject this Russian peace deal and carry on fighting." Now, apparently, there were also some rumors that the Ukrainian side weren't exactly fond of the deal itself, but I won't be surprised if it's a matter of, well, they were pushed overall to carry on fighting the war. In the end, futilely, due to Boris Johnson and the Biden regime egging on the Ukrainians to fight further. Because at that point, I mean, because I'm wondering why the Ukrainian army was built up with a lot of stockpiles over like from 2014 to 2022. You can't imagine they'd last long without Western aid. So if Boris Johnson weren't to show up, you can imagine the Ukrainians would probably come to a deal, whether it was genuine or not, but they would have come to terms.
No, and it just goes to show the interest in Ukraine by Western elites. It's I mean there's several theories out there. You have the whole child trafficking, human organ stuff, and then I mean fundamentally Ukraine is a very before the war it's a very corrupt country, one of the most corrupt countries going, and it's I think there's probably a multitude of things. I think more financial, if I'm absolutely honest. I mean,
There's
there was
probably
also
also
revealed.
more. I was going to say there's probably more ethnic vendettas also on part of like guys like Blinken and Newland as well, because they've got very ethnic reasons to hate Russia as
Yeah,
well.
I was just gonna. Yeah, I was just gonna get on to that. There's also a historical. There's a historical grievance there, and some as well with the pale and everything. But then it goes back to what what, and then I think this was what Tucker was getting a bit confused, and where I sort of agree because is that you okay, you have Zelensky and okay, ally of the West, but the trouble is you still have like Ukrainian nationalists who revere Bandelo and built statues and is elevated by a fair amount as this Ukrainian hero. And it does beg the question that we I mean and we all remember at the start of the conflict that you had you had like on moments like in the Azov battalion where one of them was wearing like a swastika button or had like SS Galician iconography or the Black
The Black
Sun or
Sun.
whatever. Yeah, the Black Sun. That was on the BBC. That was so fun. I remember watching that as well, like at work. I remember I was like nearly spat out my tea watching that. But yeah, and it just does make you wonder that um, I think either the elites are aware of these sorts of people existing and that they are effectively backing them, or they are just completely clueless and they don't know, which I, I don't really believe. And so this is where it's a bit. It does like I'm like Tucker. I'm a bit lost really. That actually they do appear to be in some respects genuine um you know followers of National Socialism, let's say, of a Ukrainian flavor.
But do you think part of that is just the Ukrainian antagonism towards Russia historically? It's kind of like it's basically just shit, their form of shit posting on the battlefield.
Form of shit posting. Yeah. I mean, yes, I think there is that to it. I think um yeah, I think it's a difficult one. I think there is an element of that to it. I could understand if if Russia was still a communist nation and that this was anti-Bolshevism. But the problem I also have in this is, well, it isn't it's not the Soviet Union, so it's not Russia. it's not a, the Bolshevism angle doesn't exist, but also you have the West backing these sorts of groups who are anti-Russian, but also genuine nationalists who would be, and let's be honest, would be considered domestic terrorists in any of our countries. And so it does sort of, and I think this is what is sort of a head scratcher here, is that, and I think, I mean, Putin couldn't really give an answer on this question that Tucker asked him. He sort of said to go ask your own nations why you're doing this. But why the rallying behind Ukraine compared to what we saw with Israel last year, I see stronger establishment backing for the Ukraine conflict when it first started than definitely what occurred in October last year with Israel. And it's just the sort of why aspect. I mean, is it just genuinely the borders of Europe, of the West?
I think it's more because with the Israel-Palestine question, the Palestine issue has had a much longer, I think, tradition within Western leftism of being like a pet issue of theirs, which is largely, I think, the reason why.
That's right. All right, so we've covered this. I before we move on, I do want to actually I want to play a bit, if that's okay with you guys, of a response to this, because there have been a few responses. What's quite interesting is a lot of those the criticisms to Tucker after this interview of actually doing it was basically, oh, it's they never actually talked about the details of what Putin said or Tucker said, but it's basically, oh, it was Putin hijacked the interview, which I think he kind of did, but also it was all of it was wrong, it was all incorrect, but they don't provide any, they never do anyway, but they didn't provide any examples. And one of which is, I just get your reaction to this. Was Tom Holland, who was he's a historian. Many deals with Roman history, and he's known in the UK. I've read his. I've got one of his books actually on Rome. And I mean, he let himself. He sort of revealed himself as a bit of a shitlib in 2020. John, are you aware of this Tom Holland fellow, this Roman historian?
I don't care for the Spider-Man films myself.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm familiar. Yeah, I just
Yeah.
have to do that one.
Yeah, that's a good one there. Yeah, so we'll just play a bit of this the non-Spider-Man Tom Holland. Hold on a sec, I'll just share the screen here. Get our reaction to this. Let's see.
People often say it's a great shame that more political leaders don't take an interest in history. But I would say that, I mean, Putin has an obsessive interest in history, and I think it's pretty calamitous. I think the world would be in a lot better state if he had no interest in history whatsoever, because he has a particular perspective on history. It's obviously incredibly important to him. It's the great animating principle. It's what led him to invade Ukraine. It's what left Tucker Carlson in his interview, just kind of gawping and looking bewildered that he's having this interview, and here's Putin going on and on about centuries and centuries worth of history. It really, really matters, but it's wrong, because what Putin is basically doing is the classic thing that people do when they have a particular take on history that matters so much to them that they're going to block out anything else that might obstruct it. He's not looking at it and bearing in mind the possibility that his gut instincts might be wrong. And so the consequence is that he has constructed a myth in which Ukraine has always been a part of Russia. And he is illustrating this by going back centuries and centuries and centuries back to the early Middle Ages. So it's a bit like, say, the British government suddenly started advancing arguments that Ireland should be under British rule because, I don't know, St. Patrick came from Britain. It's that level of strangeness. It's notions of ethnic identity and of religious identity that are not static. I mean, quite ignoring the kind of imperial dimension to it, the colonial dimension to it, religious and ethnic identity are not the same in the 21st century as they would have been in the early Middle Ages. And it seems bizarre that a political leader should believe that so passionately that he is willing to take the steps that Putin has done. And of course, you know, in the course of the interview that he did with Carlson, to come up with facts that are so plainly wrong that everyone knows they're wrong. So when he says that when in 1939, when the Germans invaded Poland, the Poles were collaborationists, everyone knows that's wrong. And what makes it even more egregious is that everybody knows who was actually collaborating with the Nazis in the partition of Poland. It wasn't the Poles themselves. It was the Soviet Union, of which Russia is the predominant heir. And the fact that Putin should play fast and loose with such a well-known part of history, I think just absolutely exemplifies the way in which basic historical fact is being sacrificed on the altar of his no doubt passionately held sense of what history should actually be like, but isn't.
Well, all I have to say is he has such a dysgenic, punchable face, doesn't he?
Yes. Well, I mean, first of all, the area of Western Ukraine in Kiev, Ruthenia, the term Ruthenia, what is it Latin for, guys?
Russia.
There you go. There you go. That is literally the argument that shuts down everything that Halfwit has just said for the last few minutes.
Yes,
It
and
refutes everything. I mean,
he's being very disingenuous with, equating, St. Patrick was British, therefore Ireland should be part. No, that's a completely false equivalent with what Putin's arguing, because Ukraine, it is not a myth. It was literally part of Russia, you fucking moron.
And the thing is, it was founded by Russian people. They're not an extinct race. They are still present. They are the Russian people of Russia. St. Patrick was a Romano-Brit. Now, the Romano-British, while became the Welsh and everything else, but they don't exist. The Anglo-Saxon people are the inheritors of England. So yeah, that argument as well, it again doesn't work out. I have also seen arguments in I think in that responses like, oh, if England claimed what was it? If England claimed Normandy and by that twink on GB News, large parts of France. Well, I mean, first of all, those territories were not claimed by the English people. Those were claimed by the House of Anjou, which they did have a claim to. But regardless, that's I mean, that's complete false dichotomy, because the foundation of the English people, is within Anglo-Saxon history. Fundamentally, I mean, the foundation of Scots and Welsh and everything is different. Maybe you can use that example of St. Patrick and the Romano Brits and Celts and everything, but I mean, it's complete false dichotomy. And what makes it bad is that, of course, he is a historian. He's quite a competent one. He isn't like a Merrybeard who's completely clueless and makes up random crap about diversity in the Roman Empire or something. He knows better, and he does know better. And I think what he, in this clip, is he does struggle to. He's thinking to himself, how am I going to gaslight everyone watching to believe that because he's shutting it down without providing any examples. I mean, if he was a good historian, he might try and argue points that we've raised. Maybe the fact that the Polish-Lithuanian I mean, I'd have more respect for him in some ways if he just argued, well, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth occupied that region and the Duchy of Lithuania occupied that region, so there was significant cultural changes or something like that. But I mean, that's weak. That's a weak argument anyway. But I mean, he instantly shuts it down because he knows, well, he knows deep down that that isn't the case, and that there is that foundational myth. But what I find interesting is that a reflection of his mind and the modern man is the idea that war and conflict being fought on a religious and ethnic basis is an alien concept. What do you guys think of that that point? Because it's just kind of weird how he framed it, how he phrased all that.
Again, I think it's people are still ideologically trapped within Fukuyama's concept of the end of history. We're all just going to live in this wonderful liberal democratic paradise. Kumbaya, everybody. Oh no, here are these horrible identitarians going to ruin it all.
Yes.
Yeah, to go into that and say that the religion, the spiritual and ethnic identity is different than it was 1,300 years ago. Therefore, they are not actually Russian. It's so disingenuous to say that these are facts everybody knows, and then not explain any of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's completely disingenuous. And I mean, all conflicts in not just in Russian history, but in European, in every civilizational history, it does come down. It does come down to either religion or ethnicity or both. And it's not so old. I mean, look at the disintegration of Yugoslavia. I mean, that's a very clear example of that. But and it's in recent history, the 90s and such. But anyway. So it's been 1 hour and 12 minutes. We'll probably. Has anyone else got to add on? Add before we move on to our next subject?
I just think it's important to note that Ukraine just needs another $20 billion, and they're going to get it done. I think this has become like the normie QAnon thing, where this is trust the plan is just give it $20 billion more and they'll complete their objective.
Yes. And victory, as Boris Johnson said, victory is in sight. The old Ivan's on the run. Isn't that right, Mitch? Old Ivan's on the run.
Yeah, don't forget about beach party in Crimea. All the national tours are going to be there.
Yeah. Going to have George Floyd memorials, statues, and rainbow flags from every small Slavic village from
don't forget don't forget the Darth Vader statues as well.
Yeah, the Darth Vader statues. Yeah.
Perhaps they'll put a nice big statue of Zelensky where they knocked down that one of Catherine the Great.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of well, I'm not going to make that joke. I can't make that joke on it about there's some people I've tried sort of a bit of sculpting work, and I cannot always get the nose right. Anyway, yeah, so we'll move on to our next topic. So this one was it's something I've been thinking about for a while, and I mentioned to you guys briefly beforehand, but I use the Ring of Power as the example on this because I think it's quite a good one because it's the most notable, high-profile one. But in recent years, maybe for a while now, and I just haven't noticed, but in recent years, storytelling has been incredibly poor. And it's not just me. There are many other people who, not even necessarily people explicitly right wing or traditionalist or what have you, have noticed this. But it's extremely poor. Writers can't help but insert, I guess, what you could say, quote unquote, woke values into it, or when adapting an existing story or remaking or whatever, removing elements that is not in line with modern day values. I mean, we've all seen these sorts of these things go on. And Nathan Hood did a stream recently where he was talking about storytelling and mythology and all that. And there was one bit he was talking about how storytelling, it kind of reflects what sort of stories you tell reflects on the people and the age you're in. And so we're in an age which I think is unique, number one, in technology, in how connected we all are, as on all world scale, but also the way it perceives itself, and that unlike other eras in the past, we have an elite or group those who govern us, who express absolute hatred for for our group, the in group, and show exceptional support for the out group. And so, I mean, instead of having stories of which are uplifting or heroic in good times, or depressing and downtrodden in poor times, I mean, there's now we're not really having any. There's nothing. I mean, and John, you're sort of I mean, the expert. We got the expert here on this, but what do you make of all this? I use Ring of Power as an example. I mean, there are plenty of others. You got, I guess, like your Star Wars, or you got this new Avatar thing I saw the other day. That's like a remake of a cartoon. So there does seem to be this consistency within the mainstream, the established of writers, and it's not just within Hollywood, it also spreads out as well. Like you see it in the BBC as well, where there used to be fairly decent back in the day decent dramas, but today there's just there's nothing of value.
Well, it has a lot to do with what we value in society now. Well, I shouldn't say that. That's too broad of a statement. It can really be broken down into this. I think that people are frying their brains, writers and development executives included, with like social media and the internet, and constantly tickling the dopamine receptors. So we no longer can go deep in our considerations and our imagination, because we're so used to external stimulation doing that for us, to consider deep thoughts elsewhere. And so this ideology is taking the place of our value system and what has value. We're writing horrible, quippy dialogue that reads a little bit more like a Twitter feed than it does a monologue from a great novel. We're lacking the authenticity and the believability. I had mentioned behind the scenes, I didn't watch Rings of Power. I watched just enough of like what they put in the trailers, which is often considered some of the best stuff, and it is so insipid that I cannot engage with it. That whole thing with like the rock in the boat analogy was so stupid that it's not even worth your time. You just can't be bothered to watch this stuff. It's unbelievable too with the acting, as we see particularly in films, because I think instead of doing rehearsals, companies, creatives are leaning on the incredible proficiency of the technology as a way to compensate for shallow content. Am I wrong about that? Like I can't watch any movies like that are from the contemporary era and be engaged. It just doesn't happen for me.
That's a very interesting point, John, because as we've been talking about Tolkien and the Silmarillion, it's interesting to look back at the obviously the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings films and then the Hobbit films he did, because they were made about 10 years apart. And then now the Lord of the Rings films do have a fair amount of CGI and effects in them, but I think they're fine. I think they're quite good, and there's a good mix of practical effects and on-scene filming. Whereas in the Hobbit films, like everything is 3D and green screen, like there's hardly any like natural surroundings that they're in, and it just looks so bad in comparison to those original Lord of the Rings films, as an example.
And it's really hard for the actors to then engage with that like lime green auditorium. The empty lime green auditorium is really hard to give an honest human performance in a totally sterile and artificial environment.
No, yeah, absolutely, and I do also think that, you know, so I did watch like a few episodes of Rings of Power. I think it was like the first two, and there's
Why?
this. Well, because I wanted to,
How could you, AI?
I had a bingo card, and on the bingo card, I had highly emotional, strong-willed woman, interracial friendships, coupling.
Intellectual dick flattening. Yeah, I get
Yeah,
it.
yeah, you get the idea. And I had like my bingo card out, and I was like ready to go. And then I think by the end of episode 2, I was all filled out. So yeah, that was it. But uh, what I mean, but on the joke side, because the bingo card, there was some. I mean, I also didn't have a bingo card in front of me, but in my mind, I sort of knew, okay, this character is going to behave this way because every female character in like a protagonist sense is now this.
Yep.
Of course, these two interracial, like this Black Dwarf and Elrond or whatever, is going to be friends because that's how that goes. And you know,
Well,
of course,
every character is so agreeable. Like there's no if there's any conflict whatsoever, it's the new man challenging the old man. It's never a disagreement. It's always some form of misogyny or prejudice that needs to be stood up against. It's not real conflict.
yeah, I mean, it's basically like some one massive big civil rights circle jerk in Tolkien's universe, and I mean, of course, one of the most ridiculous ones as well, which I found out later was like this, just like some sort of love interest between Sauron and uh, Galadriel, which yeah.
Well, I think that was probably put in to tick the toxic masculinity box because it does it get more toxic than the lieutenant of Morgoth?
Yeah, because he was gaslighting her, wasn't he? You know, he
Yeah,
was like
exactly. Yeah,
gaslighting her, and
that's the patriarchy, man. That's what
yeah,
she was being lured in by the patriarchy. But yeah,
yeah,
again, it's just so shallow. It's this convention of contemporary values that they're playing to because they just don't dare tell a classic story from Tolkien. Because if you've read the Silmarillion or the Children of Húrin, there's stuff there that upholds and glorifies strength in the classical sense, and it just doesn't fit.
No, because everything of the Rings of Power it was all very materialistic. It was also you know, they were it was self-serving. All characters, it was all very self-serving. But in the Silmarillion, in Lord of the Rings, in the Silmarillion, especially the story of Beren and Luthien, which is I guess my favorite in that regards, is in some ways there was always appealing to a higher cause, a higher power, or what is called beyond man, and that's something you didn't see in any sense. And you know, and it's not just in Lord of the Rings; it's in everything. It's in all forms. There is no concept of, I guess, what you could call the spiritual realm and the sort of material realm, and a sense of a higher purpose or a higher goal to achieve. Because I mean, it's kind of like I mean, in many ways, it's kind of like a complete the effects of like just atheism has gutted not just like, oh, going to church on Sunday sort of stuff of society, but it's actually like properly gutted the culture out completely.
Well, it says, or Ron McIntyre says, woke will take your religion, hollow it out, and wear it as a skin suit.
Yes.
Yeah, and it seems to be doing that for everything. That's the only thing left to believe in is this altruistic misconception of reality.
Yes. And I mean, and there is this other thing, which is the even more depressing thing, because I've done a bit of writing, and I've short stories and everything, and I'm into my mythologies. I'm more of a sort of person into Greek mythology. That I know, Mitch, you're into your, is it Anglo-Saxon, Norse mythology? I
Yeah,
think
of all Germanic, but like
Germanic, yeah.
yeah, but it's also like because I mean, Lord of the Rings, for example, was influenced not just by Germanic, but he also had a bit of Finnish through his book of Kalevala, which I suppose you can say like Northern European, but I don't. But I mean, I don't know. I know criminally little about Celtic compared to Roman and Greek.
There's
So
also
Mm,
there's also a fair amount of biblical inspiration as well in them, Tolkien.
yes, no, definitely, and it it and so one thing I was just thinking of this is, if we, even us, because we all live in the modern world, in modernity. I mean, is uh, that sort of lack of creativity, or that disconnect, I mean, that surely would affect us as well in some of our writing, the
Oh,
potential of our writing, or
hundred
can, is there?
percent. And I've personally been on like a dopamine detox regiment that I fail on here and there, but I can tell it in my own writing. Because it, like, what is the function, what is the initial function of creativity? And you can argue that it's a coping mechanism for boredom. And if we're never bored, then we're never really sitting there imagining and being creative. Thus, we are not summoning up these stories that are we find entertaining and hopefully other people will find entertaining, and not taking the time to then place them in an orderly fashion, refine them and polish them to something nice to look at, read, or watch.
Well, yeah, and the disaffected liberal, and these are the worst people. The people who are the anti woke. The people who say, "Oh, we're anti woke," and they're basically just disaffected liberals, and they'll come out with, "Well, I don't want this to be so preachy," and it's like, no, we want it to be preachy, but we want to be preachy about true Christian, uh, Germanic, whatever values. We just don't want it to be this
Yeah,
anti-civilizational crap that we
right.
are shoved down our throats today.
We have this term in the industry called on the nose. And so when you're saying preachy, I'm sure that half of that is this term on the nose, where it's just you're nailing it too hard. You want to tell your stuff, but you want to tell it in subtext. That makes it more interesting, more authentic, as it were. And that takes time. And again, to my point, like, that's not fun. So if you fried your dopamine receptors, you're not going to have the endurance for that process. Just like most of these actors are they're relying on the technology, so their performances don't feel real, because previous to this, they would spend 6 to 8 weeks in rehearsal, really understanding the material, trying to understand the characters, not distracted as much by phones and Twitter, X, video games, all this stuff that just burns out our receptors. So if we really want to tell valuable stories that are interesting and complex, we need to get away from video games and telephones. It's really quite difficult.
I mean,
Mm.
so like a complete technological
Kinda.
removal.
I mean, if you remember, like, look at how much we love Lord of the Rings. Like, what were his distractions? Pipes, maybe a
His
bit.
wife, his
Yeah,
wife.
his
I don't
wife, a bit
know.
of the whiskey, and even that is like that's real distractions, right? If it's human beings, we're losing our ability to communicate with each other, because everything is done in kind of this idealized, inauthentic way. It's this Twitter banter. It's bad dialogue. It's quippy. It's ironic. It's not authentic. It's not how people interact, and we're getting to that point where We don't know how to interact with people. Nobody knows how to interact with each other. So it's all just this weird. I can't even really put a name on it. It's just this strange, surreal thing when you really get into a conversation with a stranger and it goes somewhere. We used to do that all the time in the olden days, and now it's like weird. What are you after, man? What do you want from me?
It's really funny you say that, because in the I think back to the Fellowship of the Ring book, and there's a chapter in that where the hobbits, it's quite early, it's right at the beginning of the book, but they're all in this pub, in Hobbiton, and you've got Gaffer, and you got Frodo, and all that, and they're all sitting around talking about the going ons of
Yep.
the outside world, and strangers, and it's really funny because it's from you have like certain sayings like now queer as folk and everything, and if you ever like in Derbyshire or Nottinghamshire or anywhere sort of up north anywhere, that's quite a saying that you would hear. And so I remember reading it definitely resonated with me, because there was something I would like if I went down to the pub with my family or something. That's the sort of conversations you would hear. That's the sort of that sort of interaction is plausible, because I've heard it in some, maybe not on obviously on that sort of same interaction, but on that same sort of way of communication. I've heard it before, because it's real. It's sort of a very deep expression of how people behaved, and of course Tolkien, his influence for that would have been the English pub of his time. So in his mind, at least, when writing that.
Absolutely. That's the original GC.
Yeah.
And we just we don't have that anymore. We don't value that. And people have been lamenting the mobile phone for quite some time, but it's getting to the point where the inability to relate and communicate is going to be encoded in our DNA.
No, certainly.
Yeah. Maybe a good story would be like maybe for me to write or something. I'm just thinking about it, that would reflect modern audiences as a tale of Narcissus or something. I mean, that most appropriate, but yeah. I mean, John, do you have anything else to sort of add on modern storytelling on that regard?
I mean, I could keep going, but you're hitting your mark. All I'm saying is the reason we're not getting good stories anymore is because nobody knows how to write a good story. I shouldn't say nobody. Most people don't know how to write a good story, and those that do are not being hired in Hollywood or anywhere else. I don't know if we're just specifically talking about films. We could talk about the publishing industry too, but like the Anglo-Saxon man, the Nordic man, the Germanic man, typically pretty committed to learning a craft and driving it to its the nth degree, its furthest logical conclusion, and continuing to grow in that. And those people are not hired right now. Their books are not being published. They're being turned away at the door. So a lot of this, you're just getting this really infantile, adolescent type of thing. Yeah, Michael K. just was talking about the Disney DEI stuff. That's what it is. I mean, it's we could go into that, but that is so dangerous for so many different reasons. Dangerous for their bottom line as well.
DEI, is that diversity,
equity, and inclusion. Yeah, and so that's not just Disney. That is now industry wide in Hollywood. So any of the big companies have similar things, and even the Academy Awards is now awarding. You can only be eligible for certain awards if you can tick those boxes. And I think that's in Cannes as well, and the Venice Film Festival. It's in Europe. And I mean, that approach in and of itself is inauthentic. So we're going through an inauthenticity crisis. And that is why we're not seeing good stuff. It's because we're not doing good stuff with our lives. We're not going out. We're not interacting with people. The people we're interacting with have gone crazy. And it will continue to get worse until a good handful of us can just metaphorically walk away.
No, that's true. And also, I mean, like in the UK here, John, it's also mandated in law as well. You know, under the Conservative government though, as well. The diversity inclusion in media. I
Yeah,
mean, there was
the BAM, the Black and Minority Ethic. I actually worked. I have friends in London, and we worked on some projects for the BBC. And luckily, they were of color, but they told me straight up, you would not be hired otherwise if it weren't for your attachment.
yeah, because I was a production runner on a historical drama right back along my college years. This was a long time ago now, and this would be for Americans, production assistant. I forgot what they called them. It's not runners, but
PAs.
production assistant.
PAs.
Yeah. And this one was set in Tudor England, and this was probably just on the cusp of when the change happened, because of course, you know, Tudor England, you know, there's not going to be any like black or Asian people. Obvious reasons why there won't be. It's everyone's going to be, you know, white, Northern European. And I remember at the time, you know, discussions of that being said because there was going to be the change coming through, and I remember a few of like the producers at the time sort of saying that there's change coming. I remember thinking at the time that, well, at this time I wasn't really that politically aware, but obviously, how's this going to be actually work in the sort of historical storytelling? Because it would take it out of it. If you saw a black person in like Tudor, like a character of prominence, black or Asian person with an English accent, that sort of takes it out of the story, because that person wasn't there. Especially if you're telling like a story of real events and characters.
But AI, didn't you know that black people was always here? You know.
Yeah, that's the latest thing. Yeah, black people most affected by the plague in London. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, even then, you know, we had you mentioned BAME. You had there was some sort of group, it was like called the Access Group or something, and I remember that, you know, it was in like the whole media, ITV, BBC, mainly ITV as well. It was yeah, it was straight up diversity, and the trouble is, it was the quality, because I remember a lot of them, especially those who were writers. I mean, all they came up with, it was game shows. I mean, it was dismal, absolutely dismal.
Well, you can't not. I mean, there's a lot of that, and whites have been coming up with that for a long time. But it's when you look at their dramatic stuff, when it's good, it's really good. But it's not there yet, and they keep getting these jobs based on their identity, and that's just going to that'll make the content suffer immensely. I don't know why I'm saying this. We all know this to be true.
Yeah. No, and I mean, it just reinforces like grievances that exist, you know, in the culture. I mean, the question is, John, because you as you mentioned before, you're a writer. You are writing stories, and even though, as we said, we're all affected by modernity around us, there is always that hope. You know, it's always important to believe in hope for the future. And that,
Yeah.
like,
Hope is the last thing to die, and it's choice. That we all have a choice what we're going to give our time or give our minds to. So there's a chance to just pull yourself away from all this nonsense and really just start exploring people and what's in your mind, as horrible as that sounds. So
yeah, I mean,
I have hope that stuff will stand out, and we see it when something good happens, like Tucker Carlson on Real Journalism. You can say whatever you want about him. He went to Russia to interview Putin, and he got what, like 150 million views, like you said earlier.
yeah,
And
so
the
that's right.
audience
Yeah.
is there.
Yeah, the audience is there because people are interested, they're curious, you know. And this is the thing, and I talk on my show about Jonathan Bowden. I think we've all heard of that name go around, and he was a man before his time. And one thing he said that is really resonates with me is the most radical thing you can do, because you know there's always this radicalism, you know, revolt against the family or the church or anything. Then you know, that's not real radicalism. That's what the state wants you to do and all that. True radicalism is to read. It is to think, and it's to, in some ways, go against the grain. You're truly, you know, you're not a true radical if you're pushing an open door. And you know, I've never, you know, for me, I've always, that's something I've always wanted to live by. Is you know you know, to try and be not be radical for the sake of it, but to uh, to try and open my mind more than what's you know, what is sociably acceptable in today's society.
Yeah, discomfort is a tool to a certain extent. And I think that's more or less what you're saying.
Yeah, like
Is
shock. You know, I mean, I know you mentioned you've done sci-fi. I mean, there are a lot of there are others out there sort of more, you know, on the distance sphere who write and do like horrors and stuff like gothic and everything, and you know the power of the you know, discomfort or you know certain genres which are just not you know, present. You know,
yeah, not as represented, not as
yeah.
uh now it's happening to me. Analysis paralysis, but it's just not as visible as maybe they used to be, but they're still very useful. And certainly that
No,
psychological horror in the vein of H.P. Lovecraft is one of those genres that's endlessly fascinating.
It's very interesting you bring that up because I don't know if you guys are aware of Dave Martell, but he's the guy who runs the Bizarre Archives, which is one of these publishers that releases a lot of sort of pulp fiction, sort of fantasy and sci-fi, and he's a big Lovecraft fan. And one of the things he's talked about why again horror is not really as popular now is because it's sort of there's this concept called outsideness. It is horror, or the things are otherworldly and terrifying, and you don't feel safe, and that is the antithesis of this sort of modern sort of comfort and progressive sort of hug box that we all try to be shoved into.
Well, yeah, and I think that's an interesting point because you could also similarly make that argument about comedy right now too. In that our conceptions of reality right now, or most people's, not ours, the average person is threatened everywhere they look. So it's really hard to laugh at something when you have nowhere to stand. And the same thing is with horror. Like, I don't want to be afraid because I'm afraid all the time right now, whether it's Russia, or climate change, or white nationalism, you know, fill in the blank. Roving bands of minority of migrants, economic migrants, undocumented Americans is a new one we have.
I mean, who needs a scary movie when real life is a proper horror show, right?
That's what I'm saying. Turn on the TV. So I think that's where people are moving away from a lot of that stuff, and they just kind of want the reinforcement of the state values, the approved values. Just tell me more about how feminism can defeat Thanos.
Yes, it's like a sort of like a safety cushion, you know, for their minds.
Yeah, I love that
Or
term
how
hug box. I don't hear that enough. Sorry.
yeah, or how how the Jedi can save Ukraine.
You know, one of my theories, John, and I repeated this on my channel. Like, I don't know if you've seen the prequel Star Wars at all, like or any of the Star Wars films. But
Oh yeah, I'm American, man. Those are founding documents for us.
Okay, fine, Doc. Okay, that's good.
It's the Bill of Rights and Return of the Jedi.
So I have a theory. The reason why Revenge of the Sith, at the time it was released, 2005, because there was a lot of hatred. There was a lot of sort of pushback, especially by mainstream journalists mainly. You know, as a journalism sort of stuff, they were saying, oh, it was, you know, the films weren't particularly good. Revenge of the Sith was somewhat okay, but, you know, is because I think Lucas, I don't know if it's intentional or not, it's hard to tell with him, but the discomfort aspect he put in there was on democracy, because he actually highlights the problem with democracy as a sort of a system, that it's not only is it highly weak, but it's also very inefficient. Because if you think about it, throughout each three films, you have, you know, Natalie Portman, the beautiful queen, and everything, and she's basically, in the first one, she's prevented saving her planet because of, you know, bureaucracy, and then and all these like you know, corrupting, greedy senators, and then Palpatine comes along and he delivers on that, and the problem is that in some ways, what the discomfort is throughout the whole film in Revenge of the Sith is, in that the antagonist in this, so that would be Palpatine. He's not wrong. He doesn't lie. If you actually watch the film, he doesn't lie at all. And the only people who are deceiving and misleading, you know, Anakin Skywalker and is the Jedi Council, because they're trying to use him as a, you know, as a way of tool of spying and everything. And I think there is like, I do think that there is the, you know, especially from the boomer generation, that there is this the reason why there was a lot of pushback on that is because they felt, because it kind of shook a bit of their values that were brought up to its core.
Well, I think Star Wars, especially the Sith, is actually quite Nietzschean. So the idea of the will to power and this sort of overbearing great man of history, sort of crushing this sort of logjam of democracy. Of course, I find that terrifying.
Yes.
And how relatively easy it was. I think it shows how weak it was. I don't know if you guys ever read the James Lucchino Star Wars book. It's kind of
Yes,
nerdy, but
yes,
yeah, Darth
I've read it.
Plagueis.
Yes, I have. Yes, I've read it twice. I think
So
twice or
there's
three times.
also quite a brilliant audiobook of it.
Yes.
That I highly recommend, but it just kind of shows the motivations, like from a Sith perspective, of why they would need to destroy this ineffective, bloated democracy. And it's just really interesting, and how easy, relatively, there's a lot of machinations, but how easy it was to bring it down. And again,
yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
I was just going to say there's this great sort of monologue by Darth Plagueis in the novel, where he's explaining to Palpatine that because they have this power of the dark side, that by right they must rule, because if they don't rule, there's chaos. And so the justification is, I mean, throughout that sort of monologue, it's basically that their whole sort, and it goes back to what Hitman said, that they are sort of their whole justification for governance is that they must rule because they are the most powerful, you know, powerful beings in the universe.
Yeah, and in the movies, it just seems like the Jedi Council is an altruistic, sort of benign entity that is only there to put out fires. So it doesn't maintain order, it just puts out fires. So you got to go this side, that side, just to stop any uprising. They're not really ruling by example.
And also, they've abandoned the Force. You know, they don't have that spiritual element of a, you know, their order. Like, I guess you could say like, even they're skeptical of Anakin being like the chosen one of all the prophecies and everything. And I mean, there's a few of the novels that sort of goes into this, but about like the prophecy stuff. There's a one that's a recent one. I think Master and Apprentice is quite a good one, of Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan. Where you actually see the Jedi Order, you know, criticizing Count Dooku and Qui-Gon for their sort of fascination with ancient Jedi history and philosophy and religiosity. And say, no, you must, you know, you're servants of the Republic. You know, you must focus on the present and all that sort of stuff.
So that just kind of proves an interesting point here, that there is good stuff being written. Like, it may not be literature, but it's entertaining and it's deep and it's engaging. But for some reason, they don't pick that sort of thing for the screen. They write something completely new. Like, I used to think that the prequel trilogy was bad until I saw the most recent 3 films, and I didn't even watch the last one. When I heard they were bringing Palpatine back, I was just like, they're not trying anymore. They're just it's just member berries everywhere. And that's, but again, so just to your point, those books are good and they're somewhat recent. So why are they not using that material to fill out the galaxy? Why are they paying these people to write scripts who don't give a shit about the source material?
I mean, don't get me wrong. There is a lot of new books out there which are total crap. There's no redeeming factors about them. But
I'm just saying the existence of good stuff is a reason to be hopeful.
You know, funny thing enough, I think Degradation. A lot of those good Star Wars books were written in the 90s and early 2000s.
Yeah, you're right.
And
before cell phones.
Yeah, before cell phones, before yeah, and I do, and also it was under George's Lucasfilms, under George Lucas, and maybe I don't know if he had much say in it in any of the work at all, or the lore aspect of it, but it does seem that at that time, I don't want to sound like freaking Ben Shapiro, but the people who wrote them were like the best people for the job, if that makes sense. There's also that aspect that they were genuine fans, you know. And when I see or Lord of the Rings, or even like, you know, you have like the whole cotton industry of like Lord of the Rings influencers who I don't think have ever sort of thought deeply about Tolkien or his work, or what the meanings behind it, or the philosophy, or anything behind it, or even the characters, or what motivates them. It's just the aesthetics and everything now, with all these fans, all these influencers and everything. It's just freaking aesthetics, and it's just weak, and it's frustrating.
Yeah, they're co-opting it to Hitman's, or unquote. They're co-opting it for their own ideology, and they're hoping that skin suit will fool enough people.
Yeah. And I think with someone like Tolkien, that you can't, because I think with Star Wars and everything, it's probably easier to, you know, corrupt. But I think for something like Rings of Power, it just didn't work. And I think they made a loss on that. I don't know how much of a loss they made, but I know they made a bit of a loss.
It was significant.
Well, not
it was the most,
but they're still pushing ahead with a second series, from what I've heard. So
yeah,
that's so. I honestly have to think that. So they're changing, and this is inside baseball, so I'm not going to go too far into this, because the Amazon Prime, the video service, is switching to a advertising on demand model. So they're going to compensate, and I think this was largely motivated by that failure. But they're going to, because it's a free service included in the Amazon Prime membership, they're now going to add a fee where you can pay to remove ads. So they are releasing a second season. I'm sure the viewership was pretty high. I know the retention was really weak. Like, more than half of the people who started the series did not finish it. But enough so that I think they see their advertising viewership numbers able to cover. Because what they're basically doing is giving you a free, I mean, we're going back to TV. They're giving you a free membership to an advertising watching platform where Amazon is paid per viewership, and they have really specific analytics. So they're going to go through with it, and they'll probably make it even more offensive, so more people will hate watch it, because their model is based on advertising numbers.
So like that what was it, that YouTuber Quartering, is it? You know,
he's
Critical Drinker as well.
All those guys. I mean, they're just, I mean, if I were Amazon, I'd pay them to make more hate content, because the people are just coming in to watch stuff that they hate, and that's the model now.
Well, maybe to be a bit conspiratorial, perhaps they're already being paid.
I wouldn't be surprised, Hitman.
Yeah, and I don't know. It's just get if they get just get the Beren and Luthien, the Christopher Tolkien version, and just bang out a short film of that, or not even a short film, just a film. I mean, that would well.
I
But the
love it.
trouble is,
I wrote it down in my little notebook yesterday. Like, I miss watching people fall in love. Like, I honestly miss that, and I haven't seen it in so long. The only way I see it anymore is like, I mean, I don't. I was gonna say old movies, but that's not anymore.
That's a
no.
very good point, John, because one of the problems is obviously this comes up a lot in Game of Thrones, but it's practically pretty much all modern fantasy or historical TV dramas is there's no romance, it's just gratuitous sex scene after gratuitous sex scene and gratuitous like violence, and it's just it's all very, very sensate, to use a term by Piterim Sorokin. It's all about the truth of the senses.
Oh yeah, it's so degrading. I couldn't make it past like 3 episodes of Game of Thrones. So luckily, and that was first season. I've never watched it. I won't. I know that it's gross. I look at George R.R. Martin and I don't see in that man someone who believes in love.
I mean, what's disturbing about the Game of Thrones, because I watched the first season. I didn't really enjoy it. I know there are plenty of people who enjoyed it. I'm not one of those persons, but one thing I found is that it gave the false impression of what fealty and fiefdoms were like in the medieval context. And it's basically a fantasy medieval world without any honor or courage or tradition. Everything, and I get the Machiavellian angle and everything. I do understand that and everything, but when you just say everything is, as Hitman says, it's just about the senses, that what motivates all their actions, what motivates all these different rival kingdoms and factions.
That's all just revel in nihilism. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, Game of Thrones has been talked about on Twitter recently, and I think Black Horse had a great take where he says Game of Thrones should have ended with the Red Wedding and Tywin sending Joffrey to his bedroom. And I agree, that's where it should have ended.
I mean, it'd be very
if only
accurate.
Just to put an end to it. But no, that's a great point, and to a certain extent, like what about that show makes people want to watch it if it keeps going on? And it went on for what, 7 seasons?
8 seasons.
Going back to what I mean, when we said about discomfort and disgust and everything, I think there is an element in Game of Thrones that there is you have these characters, quite family orientated characters, and then we're just going to kill them. Oh, and then you got these other family characters, these brothers and sisters. Oh, they're going to have sex. I think there is an element of that there is like can build enough interest in the viewer's mind, or in the reader's mind, or what have you. But apart from that, I don't know. I mean, I think the world itself is largely, I mean, from my understanding, Game of Thrones is largely ripped from the Anglo-Saxon heptarchy, the various kingdoms and all that. So
well, I suppose there's one thing to be positive about. Game of Thrones is hardly talked about now that it's over, even with House of the Dragon, while Tolkien is still honoured and respected. So look at it that way.
That's a great point.
Yeah, true. And I mean, what was it that George R.R. Martin said about, because I remember there was this whole thing about, I didn't really follow it because I just thought it was learned nonsense, but he said something about, what about the tax system of Gondor or something?
What was Aragorn's tax policy? Yes.
Yeah, Aragorn's tax policy. It's like, who cares, merchant? I don't care.
Pathetic bean counters.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, very infamously as well, George R.R. Martin once said, I really wanted to meet Tolkien because I wanted to say to him why I thought he was so wrong.
It's just
Thanks, George.
it's an encapsulation of our age and just the irreverent attitude we have to tradition and the great men on whose shoulders we stand. It's like we find our value in subverting their values. It's like Alex Soros, George Soros' son. Like, his father built this monumental empire, and how will he grow that? How will he one up his father? And so they're now all doing it with just this weird postmodern skewing of vision and redefining terms. So their only creations will be metaphysical, as will their crisis.
I mean, I do think the whole thing will fold in on itself, because I mean, where else can it go?
It has to.
devoured.
It has no infrastructure. It's based on a sidelong reading of existing realities. It can't continue.
No. I was gonna say, Mitch, do you want to add anything at all?
Like George R. Martin's like Game of Thrones. I mean, the whole thing is just a modern interpretation of a fantasy world. And I mean, I think it was Duke who said it best. Like, it's just an anti-Tolkien. Like, the whole thing is just. Whereas Tolkien believed in more wholesome aspects of life, like the good king who saves his people from the orcs of Mordor. Instead, we have to deal with just like everything is dreary, everything's terrible. There's nothing good in the world. All of it is just Machiavellian scheming against one another. There's never anything good in the world. It's always just people backstabbing each other and wars. It's just like very, very dreary. It's like there was just never anything good to be.
I mean, there's also absent. Yeah, I mean, also in the world of Game of Thrones, from my memory of it, there's also a stark absence of hierarchy, which is something you do see in the Lord of the Rings, in Tolkien's world, that there is a clear set of hierarchy is all respected, even if there's disagreements on that. And that's more true of if we were going to say, like, medieval England or everything. But it's like that every single monarch in Game of Thrones is like a sort of hyper-focused Richard III or something, or John, King John or something. It's just sort of revel in the worst qualities of a king or a monarch.
Well, yes, and I think another example of this is, because you mentioned there about the presentation of incest in Game of Thrones with Jaime and Cersei Lannister. But think about it, in Game of Thrones, the fact that you've got a brother and sister committing incest is just a fact of the story. Well, go back to Tolkien. There is an example of incest in Tolkien. It's in The Children of Húrin, where Húrin unknowingly commits incest with his long-lost sister, and then when she finds out, she kills herself. She throws herself off a waterfall, and then Húrin falls on his sword. So there is a tragedy to something like that in Tolkien, and it's an important tragedy, and it is, because it's terrible. Whereas George R. Martin, oh no, it's just something that happens. Be shocked.
Yeah, because it's an abomination. I mean, in reality, that's an abomination against humanity. It's a affront to God.
I mean, I guess the Game of Thrones, I mean, it caused a bloody war between like 7 kings as well. So, but like the way it presented was just, it was just, because I mean, the whole thing was just framed so you end up feeling sympathy for the relationship rather than just condemning it outright. I mean, only condemnation the story will frame you to have is, it caused a war, not the fact that it was actually an abomination. It was just, it caused untold suffering through King Robert practically being cuckolded and all of his children not actually being children. Well, unless you you got a lot of illegitimate, but actually legitimate children were just children born of incest. And it's like, you even get, you get King Robert, who's basically like, kind of like a King Richard of Lionheart down on his luck, because he's just got no more war to fight and whatnot. You've got the kings who come after him who are just incompetent one way or the other. There's not any. And so when you look up the lore of Game of Thrones, it's like, I don't know, closest to you guys, Tywin Lannister, who's basically like Edward Longshanks, and he's not even a king; he's just a lord who engages in very Machiavellian scheming rather than being an outright king. So it's never actually like a perfect king, like how we would have good kings in our time. Like, a lot of time, like King Arthur. There's nothing like that in Game of Thrones. It's just every king is just so flawed that you can't really say they're a good king. It's just meh.
Well, even Wormtongue is more honourable than the average Game of Thrones character. You know, in some regards.
At least he tries to redeem himself.
Yes.
Yeah, my closest thing you had was John, who by the end of it just turned to a simping wreck, where he just keeps saying "my queen" every 5 minutes. Or
she is my queen.
Yeah, and it's like what the whole story built him up to be some sort of great king, with ahead of a whole prophecy and everything, only for him to just renounce kingship and just go back to his job policing the wall that got destroyed anyway. So you just start thinking, well, so the entire story built up for him to be this great king who would restore peace and all this, like prophesied by all this like red, fiery religion, whatever you call it, like the Lord of Light, prophesies John to be this great king. Instead, he just allows his throne to be taken by a cripple whose only abilities he's able to see into the past.
No.
And
I mean, also a big
actually,
implication. Sorry, carry on, Mitch.
He's actually called King Bran the Broken as well. That's the funniest thing for me.
I mean, a big implication of Game of Thrones, and we'll probably wrap it up shortly, the stream up shortly, but the big implication is that a lot of people, and I've seen this, a lot of people who got into Game of Thrones will then view, if they look at history, like English history or any like European history, and they will interpret it through the lens of George R.R. Martin's world that was created. I mean, and
what's funny?
Oh,
sorry.
And yeah, I was just saying what that creates is it actually, in my mind, I think in many ways Game of Thrones was like in some ways like an anti-monarchist, pro-democracy, anti-strongman psyop. In my, I know that's that's a bit like QAnon sort of stuff, but in my mind, I always it felt a bit too look at all these people, if they that just killing each other for the sake of it and everything. There's a bit of subversive elements to it in that regards.
I think just the giant.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I think it's just one great explosive diarrhea over the collective Western history and culture. So
it's cultural vandalism, because you can take something, you want to talk about Machiavellian machinations. You look at, like, did you guys watch the House of Cards? Like, I know there was the British version.
I've watched the British version. Yeah, I've watched the British version, but not the American one. But largely the story is quite similar in some regards up until they get to prime minister or president. But
yeah, yes. And it's I understand that it's different time periods, but it doesn't, like I said, vandalize your value system. This R.R. Martin thing is a complete subversion of, he sort of takes Tolkien-esque world and says, look at how disgusting this would be if it was filled with actual humans. Like, forget your aspirationalism. This is the real story. And so in that, it's vandalism. It's Luciferian almost in its inversion.
Yes. I mean, the one that really bugs me is, and this is a bit before Game of Thrones, but you had like so many stories of the Borgias, especially Cesare and Lucrezia, and I mean, first of all, there's no evidence. There's no evidence of the whole incest stuff for them. I think, if I'm absolutely honest, it was a lie that was spread by the Della Rovere family, but and the Orsinis and people like that. But yeah, you have like instances like that sort of influenced, people like George R.R. Martin. as well. There was also one that was the King of Leon. There was always like those rumors about him and his sister as well. Similar thing. Again, I don't know I don't know much about that one, but I mean both occasions they're from the Iberian Peninsula, both Borgias and that one. So maybe it was like Italian bigotry against Iberians or something. I don't know.
Well, also famously, the Emperor Heraclius married his niece, and then after he lost the Battle of Yarmouk, he felt he was forever damned by this sin of incest. And then also, let's not forget that Henry VIII claimed that he'd himself committed a sin by marrying Catherine of Aragon because she had been wed to his older brother Arthur.
Yes, no, that's true as well, and that was they had to. She had to, wasn't it? She had to say that it was never the marriage
not been
wasn't
consummated.
Consummated, yeah. Which is again, that's another thing that was legacy of poor Arthur there, Prince Arthur. I do believe that the Caligula, though, in some ways, I think he probably did do it.
Yeah, I understand you're a bit of a Caligula stan, aren't you, AI? So
I am a Caligula stan. I not for the incest stuff, but for the contempt he hold senators in Rome. I do sympathise with him, especially like I've done a bit. I tell you what, when I was doing a bit of work in local politics and especially during like general elections, when you like meet politicians, I tell you what, that's when my sort of sympathy for Caligula went through the roof at that point. So
the poor persecuted Caligula, the senators had it coming.
Yeah, poor little boots. Yeah, he knew what to do with those pesky politicians. Yeah.
You just make your horse a senator, then that way they're loyal to you, right?
Yes.
How close to the thick of it was that experience for you?
I mean, I would say yes, minister, prime minister is probably a bit more accurate than thick of it. I think thick of it, there is some elements of it true. I mean, a lot of the shouty, sweary bit is a bit over the top. Doesn't happen, but the managerial side of it, the sort of office-based side of it, is quite accurate. Yeah, definitely.
Perhaps we could say it's a more a representation of the new Labour political machine than anything else. So
yeah, I mean the thing there is what makes that, because of course a lot of it is that they're sort of basing it on like people like Alistair Campbell and that sort of stuff, like the sort of the Scottish one on that. I would say when you deal with like local government, they're far more passive aggressive. They won't be, they're not explosive as that. I mean, if he was to do half of that stuff, he'd be I mean, someone would record it and send it to like the Sun or something. It just wouldn't happen. So yeah. But I would say the sort of incompetent natures of ministers and politicians is accurate. That is completely accurate, and probably underplayed in some ways. I mean they are just fucking morons.
Perhaps equal parts in the civil service.
Sorry, Mitch.
Yeah, the real brains in the civil service. Because I've got a local Tory MP, and I've known like Tory voters, like the rural Tory types, who are they're the kind of people who, even if Boris Johnson were to come around, burn farms to the ground, and sell their families into slavery, these type of rural conservatives, means like Tory MPs would still vote Conservative. That's the kind of people you're dealing with when it comes to all these Tory MPs, Tory loyalist types.
Yeah, and if a minister or an MP even dared to investigate something of significance that was, in the remit of the civil service, they would just be bamboozled and shut down and go through the ringer. They wouldn't. If the civil service wanted to keep something, they'd keep it from you quite effectively. And And that's where power lies, I'm afraid, everyone.
For now.
For now, you know. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I always, I don't know. I mean, related to storytelling, I mean, I don't know how familiar, say, someone like John would be with Robert Eggers in terms of his work, but I mean, because I've heard it said that he's like a complete shit lib and all this, yet he will still be
the
very,
filmmaker.
yeah, you know, The
Yeah.
Witch and Northman.
Sorry,
oh, sorry.
Yeah, so of Robert Eggers' films, I've seen The Northman, but I've not seen the others. But I will say I thought The Northman was very good, and I did respect his wanting to portray them as accurately as he could in their own logic and worldview.
Yeah, so cause I've heard it said that he's like a complete liberal type. So he's all in keeping with the regime ideology. However, he is very strict about keeping his films as accurate as they can. Like, so for example, he'll do The Witch, where it's based upon like New England Puritanism, and he'll just do it as faithfully as he can, and he won't try and bring diversity into it, even though he's ideologically compliant. Really, when you think about like what he actually believes in.
Yeah, and
But
I would say he would have to be twice as ideologically compliant if he wasn't going to bend to some of the racial quotas. You know what I mean? Like you'd have to be a harder shitlib if you're going to cast nothing but white people. You gotta scream twice as loud.
I mean, maybe that's why he does it, because he maybe I mean, we're all sort of I'm all wrapped up in pride. I couldn't fake being a shit lib. I just give up after a few minutes. I just couldn't do it. It's not me. Maybe he can fake it so conveniently and be like the biggest shit lib going in the room, but also but actually, I don't want to say secretly being like on our side, but he knows it's just all bollocks, but he has to say all of it to get what vision, because he desperately wants to get that piece of work of his out there.
Well, yes, that's I once said at Belfast that he had to cast a black man in it because the film producers just told him, look, we can't okay your film unless you agree to all the diversity stuff. And he even said that in interview as well. So he was very open about the diversity quotas.
Yeah, because he said, like, well, when I was in Belfast in the 60s, I mean, the only black people that you would see would be British servicemen who, when they were patrolling the street, and that'd be like the odd one or two, which is true. That's the only black person you would see in Northern Ireland at that time.
Yeah, so that's just like how. I mean, on one hand, it's like I mean, Critical Drinker, like he's got like a whole load of series about why. Because I mean, on one hand, yeah, the self-loathing, like intellectualism we have to suffer with these days. That's a big reason of why we can't create any good films anymore. But it's also because there's just not that sense of initiative. Like you take the 80s where you had films like Blade Runner and whatnot. You can't imagine those films being made nowadays because initiative just isn't there on part of our elites, like on part of our culture creating elites. And like the only sectors you get are like small time independent horror films like Hereditary, which are from the outset they're outside mainstream circles, so they're not bound to it, even though they're not going to be rebelling in any way, but they're outside the mainstream, so they can do a lot more with, let's say, $8 million, whereas a Marvel film, it's like, I mean, was it production hell as a phrase? Like, yeah, there's plenty of films like that nowadays where they just go over budget a lot, and so that just forces producers to just zerg in on Marvel, DC, all the mainstream stuff, never anything outside the box. Just no sense of initiative anymore because it's just too expensive.
Yeah, I could speak to at length at that, but yeah, that sort of thing is really contributing to overly cautious development and executives not wanting to take a risk on anything but a sure thing.
Yeah, indeed. I say we just gone midnight here. I think probably, unless anyone's got anything else they want to say on the topic, we might call it a night?
Yeah, that
Fine
sounds
with
good to
me,
me.
yeah.
It's 2
Yeah,
hours.
fine with me.
Yeah, so I mean, so John, Mitch, and Hitman, thank you for coming on this quite short notice and stream here that we put together, and thank you. I'll say thank you, Nord Hugo, and for sort of help facilitating this as well. It's been really fascinating, this topic, actually, with what we've been discussing, and both the Putin interview and modern storytelling. I've definitely thoroughly enjoyed this, and I hope we catch up and carry on sort of other topics in the future with this, because I think this was a pretty good stream.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time, fellas. I appreciate it, and everyone listening.
Yeah, they're fantastic discussion, and always good to meet and talk with new people in these spheres of ours.
Yeah,
Definitely.
same. Sorry. Because I mean, this is the first stream I've done in a while that isn't to do with Duke, so kind of think of box with this one.
No, that's right, and it's a bit of a sort of all different people coming together here. So anyway, if any of you've got has any of you got things you want to promote, anything you shill at all, if there's any links, send them to me on Twitter, and I can put them in the description below after the stream's gone out, after we finish, that is. But has there anything you guys promote?
Yes, next Saturday, I'm going to be streaming with my good friend Hunger the Dye Merchant. He was in the chat earlier. We're going to be continuing a series I've started on Eli Kaduri's The Chatham House version and other essays, a sort of deep dive into modern Middle Eastern history. So if you find that interesting, stay tuned for that.
Well, that's cool. I met Hunger at Shillings a couple years ago.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I did so if you ever see any of the videos of the Shieldings, like for the book, all the teaser trailers and stuff like that, the video, I did those.
Oh, nice. Cool.
He's a good chap. I think he first popped up on my radar with I did a stream with Cringe Walker on East Germany, and I was big Erika Honecker fanboying over Erika Honecker. So that's good. John, have you got anything else you got anything to promote?
I've got a lot of irons in the fire stuff that's going to be coming out, people that we're working with. So just follow me on X at Cinder Mountain, and I'm on YouTube at Cinder Mountain too. So I got a bunch of stuff coming.
Oh, that's good. Mitch, have you got anything you want to promote at all?
No, I can't. I mean,
that's all right. Got nothing.
Well, you made us wait for it too, so I thought I was like, "Oh, it's gonna be good," but nah.
That's okay. Well, Mitch is on Iron Duke's channel usually every Saturday. We get his sort of takes on there, and you give like regular. You give on Iron Duke's channel like a regular update on what's going on in the Russian conflict, so that's always a good one to watch out for. Yeah, I mean, and for myself, I've got my channel. We got a backlog of the Richard Hilton's Decline and the Mysterious Death of the British Empire book. We're going through with Connor. Yeah, we should have a few more streams of that coming up. It's definitely very interesting book we're going through here. We do plan to, because of course he died in the 1970s, so we are planning to continue with Peter Hitchens afterwards, to sort of do like a grand narrative of Black Pills or something. I don't know. It's a grand narrative, grand story of Black Pills, all in one go. So yeah, should be fun. Anyway, thank you everyone in chat for watching. Thank you to our guest, and we will all see you later.